The 5-pound note in your hand is a masterpiece. The linen paper has the correct snap. The watermark of Britannia is crisp when held to the light, and the ink feels raised against your thumb. It is, by all official accounts, genuine. Yet this bill was not printed in London. It was birthed in the heart of a nightmare. This was the silent weapon of the mid-20th century, a stack of high-grade paper designed to erase the British Empire from the inside out. While the world watched the front lines, a shadow war was being waged behind the barbed wire of Sachsenhausen. The objective was not the conquest of land, but the total annihilation of a currency. If this operation had reached its full potential, the global economy might have collapsed into a void from which it would never recover. The truth of how close the world came to this silent collapse remains one of the most chilling chapters of the era. A story of genius trapped in a trap where the price of survival was the perfection of a lie. In the early 1940s, a strange phenomenon began to ripple through international banking systems. Perfect banknotes, indistinguishable from the genuine currency of the Bank of England, were surfacing in neutral territories like Switzerland and Sweden. They weren't just high-quality fakes, they were flawless. Even the most seasoned inspectors at the central bank found themselves doubting their own eyes. This was the beginning of Operation Bernhard, a meticulously planned economic strike designed to flood the market with hundreds of millions of pounds in counterfeit bills. The goal was simple and devastating: trigger hyperinflation, shatter public trust in the British financial system, and force the enemy to its knees without a single shot being fired. But the architects of this plan needed more than just machines. They needed the most skilled hands and minds the world had ever seen, and they found them in the most unlikely and tragic of places. Deep within the confines of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, hidden away in blocks 18 and 19, a specialized team was assembled. These were not soldiers or engineers, but master engravers, professional artists, and expert printers. To the rest of the camp, they were ghosts. To the officers in charge, they were the most valuable assets in the entire Reich. These men were plucked from the general population and given a choice that wasn't truly a choice. They were offered clean clothes, decent food, and a bed with sheets. In exchange, they were tasked with committing a crime of such magnitude that it could alter the course of history. They were forced to become the world's most prolific counterfeiters, creating a fortune for the very system that held them captive. The atmosphere in those secret blocks was a jarring contradiction to the surrounding landscape. While the rest of the camp faced unspeakable hardships, the forgers lived in a gilded cage. They had access to cigarettes, music, and even newspapers. However, this comfort came with a psychological weight that few could endure. Every bill they produced was a potential nail in the coffin of the Allied forces. If they succeeded, they helped the enemy. If they failed to meet the impossible standards of their captors, their utility would end. And in that world, being useless meant being erased. They were walking a tightrope between excellence and extinction, knowing that their lives were only as valuable as the quality of the ink on the paper. The technical challenge they faced was monumental. The British 5-pound note of that era was a masterpiece of security. It was printed on a specific type of linen paper with a complex watermark and an intricate numbering system that the Bank of England believed was impossible to replicate. The forgers spent months analyzing the chemical composition of the paper, the specific density of the ink, and the microscopic variations in the engraving. They realized that the secret wasn't just in the printing, but in the aging. A brand new counterfeit bill looked suspicious. To make it believable, they had to simulate years of circulation. They formed long lines, passing the bills from hand to hand, rubbing them with dirt and oil, and folding them repeatedly to mimic the wear and tear. of 1,000 transactions. They were not just printing money, they were manufacturing history. As the months turned into years, the scale of the operation expanded. Millions of pounds were flowing out of the secret workshop and into the global market. The quality was so high that even when the Bank of England was alerted to the existence of the counterfeits, they were forced to admit that the notes were virtually impossible to detect through standard means. The silent weapon was working. The British economy began to tremble under the weight of the fake currency. Panic started to seep into the upper echelons of the treasury. They were facing an invisible enemy that could devalue every savings account and every pension in the country. The Bernhard notes were appearing everywhere from the Balkans to South America, used to pay for intelligence, fuel the black market, and disrupt international trade. The pressure on the prisoners intensified when the objective shifted. Having mastered the British pound, they were ordered to turn their attention to the United States dollar. The dollar presented a different set of challenges: new paper, different ink, and a more modern design. The prisoners knew that if they succeeded in cracking the dollar, the global consequences would be catastrophic. Within the walls of Block 19, a silent resistance began to form. The master forgers, led by the legendary Solly Smolianoff, began to subtly sabotage the process. They found ways to delay the production, claiming technical failures or chemical imbalances. They were playing a deadly game of chess, with the SS officers buying time for the Allies to advance, even as they continued to produce the currency that kept them alive. The tension within the workshop was a palpable, suffocating force. Every time a high-ranking official visited, the prisoners had to perform the role of the loyal worker, showing off their progress while hiding their deliberate errors. They knew that their overseer, Bernhard Kruger, was under immense pressure from his superiors to deliver results. Kruger was a man of contradictions, protecting his specialist prisoners from the more brutal elements of the camp administration, not out of kindness, but out of a desperate need to keep the factory running. This created a twisted dependency where the captor and the captives were bound together by a shared secret and a shared fear of the future. As 1945 approached and the sound of artillery grew closer, the operation began to crumble under its own weight. The order was given to dismantle the factory and move the prisoners and the equipment to a hidden facility in the Alps. The panic of the retreating forces was evident. They were no longer trying to destroy the British economy. They were trying to hide the evidence of their crimes. The crates of counterfeit money, amounting to billions in modern value, were loaded onto trucks and transported through the winding mountain roads. The prisoners were moved to the Ebensee camp, where they were certain their final utility had reached its end. They were no longer assets, they were witnesses. In the final days of the conflict, the crates of money met a mysterious fate. Many were dumped into the depths of Lake Toplitz, a dark, freezing body of water surrounded by dense forest. The sight of thousands of perfect banknotes floating on the surface of the lake, being scooped up by local villagers, remains one of the most surreal images of the war's conclusion. It was a literal flood of wealth that was worth absolutely nothing. The secret of the ghost money was out, but the scale of what had been lost or hidden remained a subject of intense speculation. For decades after, divers would search the treacherous depths of the lake, hunting for the remains of a fortune that could have changed the world. When the Allied forces finally liberated the prisoners of Operation Bernhard, they found men who were physically intact, but psychologically scarred. They had spent years perfecting a deception that they hoped would fail. They had survived by becoming the very thing they were forced to be: geniuses of the fake. The British government was forced to take drastic measures to save its economy, eventually withdrawing all large denomination notes from circulation and redesigning their entire currency. The Bernhard notes had done their damage. not by collapsing the nation, but by permanently altering the way the world viewed the security of its money. Even today, the full extent of the operation is shrouded in a layer of historical fog. Some estimates suggest that over 100 million pounds were produced, an astronomical sum for the time. How much of that money successfully entered the system? How much of it was used to fund the escape of high-ranking officials in the chaos of the post-war world? There are accounts of counterfeit bills surfacing in banks as late as the 1950s and 60s, a lingering ghost of a war that was supposed to have ended. The perfection of the work was such that many notes likely passed through dozens of hands, from shopkeepers to bankers, without ever being identified as fakes. The story of the Sachsenhausen Forgers is not just a tale of crime or war. It is a dark thriller about the fragility of the structures we trust. We believe in the value of the paper in our wallets because we believe in the system that issued it. Operation Bernhard proved that this belief is a delicate thing, easily manipulated by those with enough skill and enough desperation. The prisoners in blocks 18 and 19 were forced to prove that the line between a genuine fortune and a worthless piece of paper is thinner than a watermark. They were the architects of a silent apocalypse that never fully arrived. But the blueprints they created still haunt the corridors of financial history. Some researchers believe that the most significant portion of the counterfeit wealth was never recovered. They suggest that hidden caches of perfect bills were moved into secret accounts or buried in locations that remain unknown to this day. The idea that a shadow economy built on the labor of the Sachsenhausen geniuses could have influenced the post-war reconstruction is a theory that persists in the margins of history. It invites us to wonder if the stability we see today is built on a foundation that was once threatened by a meticulously crafted lie. The files on Operation Bernhard remain a complex web of reports, testimonies, and missing pieces, leaving us with a mystery that may never be fully solved. The legacy of the operation is visible in every modern security feature we see on our currency today. The holograms, the color-shifting inks, and the complex polymers are all descendants of a race that began in a secret workshop behind barbed wire. We are constantly trying to outpace the ghosts of the past to ensure that the silent weapon can never be used again. But as technology advances, the lesson of Operation Bernhard remains. The most effective way to destroy a society is not through its walls, but through its trust. The men who were forced to forge the pound understood this better than anyone. They were the keepers of a secret that could have ended the world, and they carried that weight until the day they died. The dark irony of the operation is that the very perfection the forgers achieved was what saved them. Their captors became so obsessed with the quality of the work that they treated the prisoners as essential tools rather than disposable lives. In the darkest place on earth, excellence became a shield. But that shield was made of glass. Every day was a gamble, every note a life or death decision. They lived in the intersection of extreme luxury and extreme horror, a psychological vacuum that few could imagine. The wealth they created was a hollow promise, a mountain of paper that represented nothing but their own struggle to see the next sunrise. The sheer volume of paper involved was enough to bury the truth. Imagine the logistical nightmare of moving tons of high-grade linen paper through a war-torn continent. The Nazi regime went to incredible lengths to source the raw materials, including Turkish linen and specific dyes from occupied territories. They were building a ghost empire, one that existed only on paper, but had the power to buy real power, real fuel, and real lives. When the paper was finally cast into the lake, it wasn't just money that was drowning. It was evidence of a grand, desperate delusion. As the sun set on the era of the great forgers, the world tried to move on, but the questions remained. What happened to the master plates? Where did the specialized paper go? And most importantly, who were the people who truly benefited from the millions that vanished into the post-war shadows? The archives offer some answers, but the most intriguing parts of the story are written in the gaps between the lines. It is a narrative of what might have been, a glimpse into a world where the currency in your pocket is a phantom, and the economy is a house of cards, waiting for a single perfect counterfeit to bring it all down. The story of Operation Bernhard reminds us that history is often written in ink that hasn't quite dried. It is a reminder that the most significant battles are sometimes fought in total silence, by people whose names we may never fully know, using tools that look as harmless as a sheet of paper. In the quiet of Lake Toplitz and in the forgotten corners of bank vaults around the world, the echoes of the Sachsenhausen Forgers still linger. They remain a testament to the power of human ingenuity under pressure and the terrifying vulnerability of the systems we depend on. The ghost money may have been pulled from the water, but the mystery of its true impact continues to drift in the deep, a silent thriller that has no final page. Every time we check the authenticity of a bill, we are engaging in a ritual that started in a concentration camp block. We are checking for the ghost of Bernhard Kruger, for the meticulous lines of Solly Smolianoff, and for the fear of a world where value can be manufactured out of nothing. The real weapon wasn't the money itself, but the doubt it planted. Once you stop believing in the paper, the system fails. The forgers knew this. Their captors knew this. And the bank officials who burned mountains of suspect currency after the war knew it best of all. The perfection of the lie was so absolute that the only way to kill it was to destroy the currency entirely. In the end, the most dangerous weapon of the mid-20th century didn't leave a crater. It left a question mark.